Shalom. So I'm letting this sit up here for a little bit so people can read it. Can we trust the text of the New Testament? The original text was Mark, and Mark was written after Paul. One of the things I've been over numerous times, and this is the title meme because, Adam's using this video of, I think this was God's Not Dead. I'm not 100% sure. And he's making the point that Lee Strobel is saying they exist whether we like it or not, which I just found funny. So it reminded me of this stupid commercial. But as we see, this is not a uniform opinion. There are many that think uh, there isn't sufficient evidence. The historical Jesus, as presented by the Gospels, could not have existed. And I went over this with the resurrection accounts. They don't line up. You see what you want to see. Your pretext blinds you.
Until about the middle of the 4th century, 300 years of copying before we have a complete copy that survives.
And he's right. I mean, if you look at the Gospel of John, it was the most redacted gospel in the New Testament. And I proved this. You could see this in the text itself. It has 4 endings. John 8, a passage that is beloved by so many, an adulteress forgiven. This wasn't in any of the earliest manuscripts. In fact, it may not have been in the gospel until the 6th century. And these are texts you trust with your soul, with your salvation. And that's something else I'd love to touch on, how deceived Christians are about the state of being saved.
There were lots of copies made before this complete copy, and there were lots of copies made before P45. P45 is not a copy of the original Mark. It's a copy probably of a copy made a few years earlier, which was a copy of a copy made a few years earlier, which was a copy of a copy made a few years earlier, and so on and so on. There have been numerable stages between the original and our first copy. How many mistakes had crept into the text before we start getting copies?
It's not just how many mistakes. We have this complete picture, so to speak, that you read as a complete document. I mean, look at an example here that my parents had this in a nativity set, right? You have the whole kit and caboodle, which they take this elements from Matthew and the elements for Luke, and they synergize them. But this is not how it happened. You can't read the New Testament like it's one document. These are individual documents, sometimes written to individual cults. The Gospel of Luke did not exist in parallel with the Gospel of Matthew. You just see what I'm saying? Like, they did not have Babylonian mystics visiting Jesus in the Gospel of Luke because Luke was written with a very Jewish perspective. It would not have people from Babylon visiting. It did not have him visiting a Samaritan, which the Jews despised in any of the synoptics. And you see a text there that is clearly attacking the authority of the Torah and the prophets. Where will Yahweh be worshipped? Where he will not be worshipped on Mount Gerizim, which I think is the correct mountain, or Mount Zion, which is where the Jews think, but he will be worshipped in spirit and truth. I mean, this undermines the entire Torah and the entire prophets, that he's not going to have a chosen city. It's spiritual. But why would they do that? Well, because John was written in the second century, and its goal was not accuracy, but to theology. And this is something like you got to realize. Like many of these writings were not written with a goal of being accurate history.
There's no way to know.
No, that's the bottom line. Like, there's no way to know. You put your faith in these documents and base your salvation on that faith. So what is your faith in? This is what I was getting at in the prior two episodes of this. What is your trust in? What are you trusting in? Do you trust in the right things? Adam, he keeps going to the Son of Yah, Son of Yah, Son of Yah. The Son of Yah is Israel. I mean, if he's wrong on that, what else is he wrong on?
The historical evidence for Jesus.
So this is Lee Strobel speaking in this movie.
That one of the most famous New Testament scholars in the world, Gerd Ludemann of Germany, said Jesus' death as a consequence of crucifixion is indisputable.
Okay. Where are these historical evidences? The Roman Church crucified a lot of people. And did you know, and this is a fascinating documentary, I love The Naked Archaeologist. I can't remember his name right now. Oh, why can't I remember that guy's name? He found a tomb of Yeshua. And guess what was else in this ossuary? Mary, his brother Jacob, James. Okay, I mean, that's pretty fascinating, right? But you Christians just ignore it. You believe the empty tomb story.
And Gerd Ludemann is an atheist, as the agnostic historian Bart Ehrman says.
No, this is why I was playing Bart, because, Lee Strobel claims to be quoting from Bart.
Jesus did exist, whether we like it or not.
And remember what he said here. He didn't say Jesus did exist whether we like it or not. He said the historical Jesus did not exist, because we cannot know what these writings actually said. So if Lee can't even quote Bart correctly, why would you trust him on these other things?
I put it this way. Denying the existence of Jesus doesn't make him go away.
Okay. Denying the existence of Santa Claus doesn't make him go away. And this isn't even the point. It's not even the point. And I was thinking about this. Why is Adam attacking this issue from this angle? Why worry about whether or not he existed and whether or not you can trust the New Testament at all? And that this is his argument. I mean, why is he going down this angle and not using the Torah to back up the New Testament? Why? Because he thinks that those of us that have left the idolatry of the New Testament, we're going to go down the path of Justin no matter what. Where Justin became an atheist and he abandoned Yahweh and he just does what is right in his own eyes. This is what he thinks. This is his argument. This is his straw man.
It merely proves that no amount of evidence will convince
you. No amount of evidence, huh? Do I have to bring it up again? Guys, Deuteronomy 18:20. Remember, but the prophet who speaks a word presumptuously, and this is throughout the New Testament, because the New Testament never says, thus says Yehovah, thus says Yehovah. Remember in Matthew 5, and this is right after he says, do not think I came to abolish the law and the prophets, right? And then what does he say? You have heard it said that you shall not murder. Whoever murders shall be guilty to death. Correct, that's Torah. But I say to you, what? And you just read it, say, oh, he can do that. He's telling me how to live the Torah. No, he's not. He's just added the Torah. He's speaking presumptuously. And this is the same with Paul, right? And let's compare the two. Matthew 5:22, 1. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. Anger is not a sin. Remember, I talked about this in my study on original sin. Then Yehovah said to Cain, "Why are you angry?" He was angry, but Yehovah had said, "Why are you angry? Why are you in this state?" He had not let sin in the door of his heart yet. So let's go back here. And he says, not only is he angry with your brother that is the problem, but whoever says raka, which is that you're a fool or empty headed, shall be guilty before the Sanhedrin. And whoever says moros, this is the Greek version of that, shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hill. Now, this is important. Like, does the Torah say that whoever calls a man a fool will end up burnt and perishing in torment? No. And he says this right after he claims he's not here to do away with the Torah, and here he is adding to the Torah.
No amount of evidence will convince those who have thrown out this thousands of manuscripts that we have. It's
I guess I've thrown them out. All these manuscripts as evidence. No, I've thrown out the New Testament because Yehovah would not murder his son for the redemption of the world. It's an abomination. Yehovah would not teach you to drink the blood of this son and eat his flesh. Not even an allegory or remembrance. That's an abomination.
he's saying that if you really can't acknowledge that this is factual, reliable, historical evidence for the gospel accounts, then there's
See what I mean? This is the straw man.
nothing that will convince you, because this is convincing even some of the harshest critics out there.
Which, speaking of which, there's some pretty famous atheists and agnostics that will, even though they don't believe, they will admit that he was a historical figure, that he actually.
Okay. Did this atheists and agnostics acknowledge why they choose not to believe? Is that what you're chasing after, or the people that have gone back to Yahweh and are pursuing Torah?
He says with a grain of salt, because he definitely comes from an agnostic perspective. But as someone who was a historian, and still is a historian,
Let's fast forward this a bit.
a Roman governor.
So this is a problem, and I don't doubt that they do, but they still didn't believe in what Christians claim today. Because you look at passages like Revelation 3:2, right? This was written probably late first century, early second century. Wake up and strengthen the things that remain, which were about to die, for I have not found your deeds complete in the sight of my God. And, this is Yeshua saying he has a God. Or John 8:40. For you are doing the deeds of your father. They said to him, you were not born. Oh, sorry, wrong verse. But now you are seeking to kill me, a man who has told you the truth. See, he's calling himself a man, not God. And it's interesting how these Messianics, these Hebrew rooters, are pursuing the path of Rome. The Ebionites, the Nazarene, that were also a Christ cult that Rome killed off, which means they were not following Torah, if you read Deuteronomy 30, but they followed him and did not believe this. They did not do this. So what did Rome do? Rome believed in a dualistic approach here before Tertullian invented the Trinity, making three one. That, there was a little Elohim and a large Elohim. And you can see that in the text of John 14:1. Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. Two, not one. And now let's look at some passages from the Torah that make this impossible. Numbers 23:19. God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should repent. Has he said and he will not do it? Has he spoken and he will not establish it? See, why would the Creator, who created all of us in her mother's womb, why would he have any need to become created? Look at Deuteronomy 4. Let's see. Deuteronomy 4:12. We'll start there. Then Yahweh spoke to you from the midst of the fire. You heard the sounds of words, but you saw no form. You saw no form, only a voice. And one of the passages they go to is in Exodus, where it says Yahweh is standing before them. But clearly you can't just take one passage and make that your context. You have to look at the totality. And this is so important, the totality of the Torah and the prophets, before you say this is what Yahweh is. That you want to make an image of God and violate the 10 words? Yes, do that. And keep reading this. So he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to do. That is the 10 commandments, and he wrote them on tablets of stone. So as we're going back to Exodus, when it said he was standing in the midst of you, right? And Yahweh commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments, that you might do them in the land where you are going over to possess it. So keep your souls very carefully, since you did not see any form on the day Yahweh spoke to you at Horeb from the midst of the fire, lest you act corruptly and make a graven image for yourselves in the form or any figure, the likeness of male and female. And I find this fascinating, given the language that Paul uses, like Colossians 1:15, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. So he's telling you he's not God, he's the image. But the weird thing about that is all of mankind is the image of the invisible God. So Paul himself, he's elevated him above the rest of mankind, using a phrase that really applies to all of us, but he's still not elevated him to the level of God. And I'll show you what I mean. Romans 8:3. So for what the law could not do, it was weak through the flesh, God did, sending his own son. And remember I told you, like, this idea of his own son, what is that? Because Israel is repeatedly called the son of Yah. So why has Paul changed the argument? In the likeness of sinful flesh. And as an offering for sin, he condemns sin in the flesh. I mean, this is all an impossible argument because, number one, if he was the Son of God and he did this, then God is a hypocrite. Deuteronomy 12:31, you shall not do thus toward Yahweh your Elohim, for every abominable act which Yahweh hates, they have done for their Elohim, for they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire for their gods. So here you have Paul claiming that Yahweh did what he calls abominable. And it even gets worse than that. Ezekiel 20:26. And I pronounced them unclean because of their gifts, in that they caused all their firstborn to pass through the fire. And remember what Paul says, that he is the firstborn, and Yahweh offered him to put sin to death as a sacrifice. So Yahweh did what the pagan nations did, what Israel got themselves into, and for what reason Israel was banished from the land? Jeremiah 7:30, for the sons of Yehuda have done what is evil in my sight, declares Jehovah. They have set their detestable things in the house which is called by my name to defile it. They have built the high places of Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and daughters in the fire, which I did not command, and it did not come upon my heart. Again, what do we see? If he did not command it, it did not come upon his heart. Why would he use this profane thing? Use evil for evil, sin for sin.
In Asia Minor, early Christians and if I'm killing, mass murdering of Christians.
Yeah, I was hoping we would get to that. The martyrdom complex. The martyrdom complex. They were martyred, so they were following truth. Does that mean the Buddhists were also following truth? Because they refused to recant their ways and become communists when Mao murdered them? Like, not just a few of them, millions for being Buddhist. Or how about the Mormons? They love to also play up the persecution complex. When there was a war, right, in Missouri in 1838. The Mormon-Missouri War, also called the Mormon War or the Missouri War, was an armed conflict between the LDS Church and other citizens of northern Missouri in the fall of 1838. The conflict expanded to involve state officials, including the governor, and resulted in the incarceration of Joseph Smith and forced the expulsion of the Saints from Missouri. They were persecuted because of what they believed. Does that make what they believe true? I mean, this is your argument, and this is the problem with this argument.
And so if Rome, for some reason, was trying to cover this up, cover up the whole Yeshua story, or make it up, and trying to convey with the Jews, maybe, that this was a cover-up, this wasn't real, this wasn't true. Maybe the Jews wanted to pay the Roman people to cover the story up somehow. They're doing a really bad job.
Furthermore, some people have recently said that Rome even concocted the whole story. And
that's what I'm getting at right now.
Yeah, I've heard that too. I don't buy into that, and even if it was true, I've gone over many times why it's not a relevant argument. This is the problem with being founded on something other than Torah.
The fact that people think that or say that, I mean, the historical evidence would say otherwise.
Don't you think Rome would write about their governors and officers in a much more positive light?
Yeah.
Instead of seeming to be kind of weak.
I actually have
a much more positive light. Oh, you mean Romans 13, bud? Every person is to be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from Elohim, and those which exist have been appointed by Elohim. Therefore, whoever resists that authority has opposed the ordinance of Elohim, and they who have opposed all receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear for authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a minister of God for your good. It is a minister of God for your good. And, you just read this and you don't even think about it. And the same is obviously true of Adam and his friend here. I forget his name. Wouldn't they make the authorities look good? Isn't that what Romans 13 is doing here? I mean, do you realize who was leader of the Roman Empire when Paul wrote this down? 1 Peter, which was written by Silas, also has a similar passage. Be subject for the sake of the Lord to every human institution, whether to the king, which would have been the emperor as the one in authority, or to the governors sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and to the praise of those who do good. For thus is the will of God, that by doing good you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. Act as free people, do not use your freedom for a covering of evil, but use it as slaves of God. Honor all kin, love the brethren, honor the emperor, which is what it says here. The emperor of Rome. Honor the emperor of Rome. You really think Yehovah wants you to honor a pagan emperor?
Point on that, and I'd like to go a little deeper on that. Sure. So the fact that in the Gospels there's a a discouraging view of the Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, priests, and even the Roman courts, right?
There isn't a disparaging view of the Roman courts, not in any of the New Testament. I mean, look at, why do you say this? It's an absolute lie. Matthew 20, which chapter is that? Oh, here we go. Right before when he goes to the Roman court. Now, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor questioned him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus said, "You say it yourself." And this is funny as well, because, they love to say Isaiah 53 is about the idol. And look at what it says here. He did not open his mouth in verse 7. He did not open his mouth. Are you the king of the Jews? He should have said, I can't talk. You say it yourself. Father, help them see this. This is so clear. And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many testify against you?" And he did not answer with regard to even single charge. And the governor marveled greatly. So now he's going to stay silent. Now at the feast of the governor was accustomed to release the crowd for any prisoner. Why would this is so ludicrous. Why would the governor, a Roman citizen, care about the Passover feast? It's so ludicrous. And at the time they were holding a notorious prisoner called Barabbas, who was probably the actual Yeshua, because you know what Barabbas means? Son of the Father. And when the people gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Christ?" For he knew that because of the envy, they had to deliver him over. And this is what I was talking about. I mean, listen to what he says here.
Kind of weak.
I actually have a point on that, and I'd like to go a little deeper on that. Sure. So the fact that in the Gospels there's a a discouraging view of the Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, priests, and even the Roman courts, right?
A discouraging view of the Roman courts. No. Because here the Roman court is telling the people that he will not do this. And it goes on and he says, after, the Jews say this disgusting statement, Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather that rioting was starting. He took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood." Yeah, it has a discouraging view when he's washing his hands of the innocent man's blood. And, that's Torah. Pilate follows Torah more than the Jews in the gospel. Deuteronomy 21:8, "Atone for your people, Israel, whom you have redeemed." Oh, sorry, let's go back a verse. Verse 7 of chapter 21. "And they shall answer and say, Our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it." And this is what Pilate's saying. I'm washing my hands of this innocent man's blood. I didn't see it shed. I'm not responsible for it. I'm leaving it in your hands. But it has a negative view of Rome? Shalom, brothers. "Atone for your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, O Yehovah, and do not place the guilt of the innocent blood in the midst of the people Israel. And the blood guiltiness shall be atoned for them." Yet we have Matthew saying this of the Jews after Pilate has more observance of Torah's commandments to avoid shedding innocent blood than they do. And all the people answered him and said, "His blood be on us and on our children." This is impossible for a number of reasons, but look at Deuteronomy 24:16. "Fathers shall not be put to death for their sons, nor the sons shall be put to death for their fathers. Each shall be put to death for his own sin." And this is also why he cannot die for your sin. But it's also why, uh-oh, it's also why his blood cannot be on his children, right? This is the curse they put over themselves. The curse they put over themselves is that Yah is going to curse them forever for doing Yah's will. I don't know why Christians don't see that. You know, the Jews are doing God's will according to them, that they had to do this for mankind to be redeemed. But yet, the blood of that murder is going to be on their heads forever, on them and their children. That's what it says, forever. They will never be forgiven for it, which is also what we see from the parable of the vineyard. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to these vine growers? And this is to the Jews who killed the son. They said to them, he will bring those wretches to a wretched end and will rent out the vineyard to other vine growers. That's Gentiles. He's saying the Gentiles are going to steal the land from Israel. And this is something I noticed last night when I was studying Luke 2. So he goes to the prophets. Where was that at? Here we go, Luke 2:34. And this is one of those things that proves all of these documents, they believed that the end of times was the first century. And Simeon blessed them and said to his mother Mary, behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rise, which is the word resurrection, of many in Israel, and for a sign to be opposed. And a sword will pierce through your own soul as well, that the thoughts from many hearts may be revealed. They believed the first century was the end of times, that the resurrection was going to happen in the first century through the birth of this child. And it didn't happen. This is why there's all these theological constructs built up around it.
It proves that these documents should have not been popular, as in the manuscripts of the New Testament. They shouldn't have been popular, right?
They were popular because people were looking for salvation. And think about that. And even today, you know, you have the fisher of men chasing after the afflicted. He lies in wait in his hiding place as a lion in his lair. He lies in wait to catch the afflicted. He catches the afflicted when he draws them into his net. And that's a powerful thing. This is what Christianity does even today. I played that passage from The Last Temptation of Christ when Paul is telling you the truth. But what does the New Testament say about being saved? Does it say you're saved once you confess? No. And even one of the passages they go to for this is Romans 10. If you confess with your mouth him as Lord, believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. It doesn't say you are saved. See, this is an important verbiage. You will be saved. Ephesians 5. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore, do not be partakers with them. And he's speaking to people that were followers of this way, that they were not yet saved. I don't know what else to do but tell the truth today. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. I agree. But yet here you are mocking him with human sacrifice and theophagy. For whatever a man sows, this he will reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will reap from the flesh corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. See, this is the future tense. You will reap it if you persist in doing what Paul calls good. And this is also telling, I mean, reading these, because what is Paul saying? That doing good is not an automatic thing as you would expect from people who confess to being saved and having an indwelling Holy Spirit in them. They still have to practice self-control, which means that the new covenant, as Jeremiah 31, is not found in the New Testament. Because it's not going to be an issue where we seek out intentional sin anymore. And I'm going to read this verse from Romans 13:11. And do this knowing the time that is already the hour for you to awaken. For now in the first century, salvation is nearer to us collectively in the first century than when we believed. And notice, salvation is nearer, not here. So let's go to Jeremiah 31:31 real quick, because this is what Hebrews quotes as being the New Testament they are in, and that the Torah is passing away. Behold, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when I will cut a new covenant, which should be renewed, with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant which I cut with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, but I was a husband to them, declares Yahweh. But this covenant which I will cut with the house of Israel after those days, declares Yahweh, I will put my Torah within them. And I don't know why Christians miss this. Messianics see it, but they still don't have the Torah in them, or else they'd reject the New Testament. On their heart I will write it, and I will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. See, it's not going to be an issue where we have to strive against the lure to sin, where we have knowledge of good and evil. We will only have knowledge of good because the Torah is going to be here. Unintentional sin will still happen, but intentional sin in this age will not happen. Then they will not teach again. And this is a bombshell when I read this with understanding. Isaiah 45, they will all see the glory of Yahweh. And this, it just destroyed the fact that there's a new covenant in place right now. They will not teach again, each man his neighbor and each man his brother, saying, know Yahweh, for they all will know me. And here you have Paul teaching people that you believe are saved, born again, that they still don't know the truth, that they have to put effort forward to keep themselves from doing evil. And this is clear if you read the epistles. It is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you, and sexual immorality of such a kind that does not even exist among the Gentiles, that someone has his father's wife. This is a man baptized in the name, and he still is doing this. He still doesn't know right from wrong. And this is a clear indication to me that Paul did not teach Torah. He didn't. He taught this vague morality in that Jesus will save you in the end if you follow his name and do what's right. And what was right in Paul's mind was just from his conscience. I mean, read like passages in Romans. It is good not to eat meat or drink wine, or to do anything by which your brother stumbles. That by faith which you have as your own conviction before God. Blessed is he who does not judge himself in what he approves, but he who doubts is condemned if he eats, because his eating is not from faith, and whatever is not of faith is sin. This is a crazy statement. Whatever is not of faith is sin? No. Whatever violates the Torah is sin.
And the fact that they discourage people from following men like the Pharisees, scribes, Sadducees, and it kind of puts the Romans in kind of a weak view, right?
Well, we went over it doesn't, but it definitely attacks the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees.
Pontius Pilate not sure of knowing what to do. Herod kind of being like laughing at Yeshua and
I don't know what to do with him
I don't know what to do. I'll send him to Pontius. It kind of makes him look weak.
Right.
Like they can't.
Of course he doesn't know what to do. Look at what, this is the allegory of Acts is so important. I went over this in a prior video. Acts 18 to 21, right? In Acts 18, we see Paul charged with teaching against Torah. And then they take him to Gallio, the proconsul of Achaia. And the Jews with one accord, and this is just like what happened in the Gospels. The Jews with one accord rose up against Paul and brought him before the judgment seat. This man persuades men to worship God contrary to the law. Why would the proconsul of Rome care? And this is the point that the author is trying to make. Oh, absolutely, Bobby. And this is something I've talked about many times. They don't understand history. That's hilarious, Charles. You're on the internet. That's a sin.
If anything, if they concocted that story, I think they would have had their stuff together a little better.
I think so too. I think so too. And I think they probably would have made it look like.
Why would you? This is another straw man. I mean, if they concocted that story, they'd have it put together better. Okay. How do I do this without getting flagged? Okay, here we go. I don't even know if this will work. That's not what I want. Like that. If they had meant to cover it up, they would have concocted a better cover up story, right? Yeah, that's not how it works.
The strength of Rome, like as all the other documents perceive them as. So these documents really show embarrassing moments for these people, and we also see in the scriptures Yeshua calling out the Pharisees, scribes, and Sadducees for their hypocrisy.
Correct. And there's a clear anti-Semitic thread in the New Testament. And I've talked about how, I don't follow the Talmudists. They have their own problems. But I would never do what he does. I mean, he literally is calling them names. I would never do that. I go after ideas, not people. But he went after people. And he never went after the emperor of Rome this way, but he did go after the Jews this way. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, hypocrites, because you shut off the kingdom of heaven from people, and you do not enter in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. And then he goes on and says, what? That they are blind guides, you fools and blind men. And yes, this is the same Greek word that he used earlier on in Matthew 5:21, when he said, anyone who calls a man a fool will be guilty before the Sanhedrin to go to the fires of hell. And then he just calls the Sanhedrin fools, which is a violation of Torah, which I talked about in the trial that everyone overlooks. Do you revile the high priest of God? Because Paul just called them a whitewashed wall and insulted the high priest. This is the problem with going after people instead of ideas. And this is what we repeatedly see. He goes after the people that disagree with him. And this is also why he's not the prophet like Moses. You see, Deuteronomy 18:15, what do we see? Yahweh will raise up for you a prophet like me, like him. And okay, so let's look at his life real quick here. Number 16. Korah rises up against Moses, and we can compare Korah to the Pharisees, right? Now Korah, the son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, the Dathan, Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and the sons of Peleth, the sons of Reuben, took others, and they rose up before Moses, together with the sum of the sons of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, those called upon by the assembly, men of renown. And when they assembled together against Moses and Aaron, they said to them, "You've gone far enough, for all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and Yahweh is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of Yahweh?" And Moses heard this and fell on his face. You see that? Now, if there was going to be a prophet like Moses, this is what he would do. And this is what we see Joshua the son of Nun do. Of course, I forget what chapter that's in. Yeah, here we go. Now, it happened when Yeshua son of Nun was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man, and this is important too. These are not angelic beings. It was a man that was representing Yahweh. A man was standing opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand, and Yeshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" He said, "No, rather I indeed come now as commander of the host of Yahweh." And Yeshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed down and said to him, "What is my Lord to say to his slave?" You see this pattern? Falling on his face before the authority. And the commander of the host of Yahweh said to Yeshua, "Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place which you are standing is holy." And Yeshua did so. He humbled himself before the authority. You know, I suggest doing the same. If someone comes at you, fall on your face and declare Yahweh as the victor, that he will decide between you and them.
And so, if the Jews didn't want this to get widespread, they probably, or maybe they wanted to cover it up. Why would they put that in there? Or why would that be even covered in this? I've heard that argument that it's just a false story created to pursue people,
to quell
yeah.
the Jews for further revolts.
Right.
And to give them some passage.
Yes. And, I agree that's in the New Testament. Why would Yahweh, who is a standard for good, tell you to violate Torah and not take out an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? But as I say to you, do not resist an evil person. And we just read Romans 13 and 1 Peter 2, this appeal to Roman authority. Do not resist an evil person. Whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your garment also. And what happens when your tunic is taken and your undergarment? You're naked. So he's saying, let an evil person slap you, abuse you, afflict you, and take all your garments.
This Messiah to call.
And that doesn't add up if you're looking at the text that's actually written there. So this would prove that the gospel accounts would not have been a popular thing, but it was. It was spread all over the place, all over the world, everywhere. There were many converts due to the manuscripts that were spread, as well as what Peter and Paul, John and James are writing about. These were widespread. I don't know how we could say it was written by one source, comparing all the copies and comparing all the variations. It just doesn't make any sense. So to me, the fact that there is such a argument out there doesn't quite add up to me. But I think people are going to try to find a way to refute this in any way they can. They'll try to throw out these things, And it's interesting to me. I would think that if the Jews really didn't want Yeshua to be out there or to be known, then they probably wouldn't have acknowledged him as a person or a historical being. They probably would have just made, he wasn't real.
Right, which brings us to number 4. His name was preserved in the Jewish rabbinic literature known as the Talmud. The Talmud, if you're not.
This is so weird. It's so weird. Like, why are you appealing to the Talmud? Oh, I wish I had that video up. I wonder if I can find it real quick. I don't remember the Christian's name. I actually talked with this guy, I believe on Facebook, and he got so upset with me for saying that human sacrifice is profane.
He is the author of 2 books and a leading Christian apologist against Torahism. It's so good to have Professor Sahlberg with us tonight.
Professor Sahlberg.
He is the author of 2 books and a leading Christian apologist against Torahism.
So according to this guy, these two guys are heretics. And this is like you believe you're under the spirit of Jehovah, but you're calling each other heretics all the time.
Hebrew roots. He studied at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and
So I forget where it's at.
God has a master's degree in theological
Oh,
studies.
it's
Daniel 7, starting at verse 9. As I looked on, thrones, notice it's plural, thrones were set in place. And the Ancient of Days took his seat. His garment was white like snow, and the hair of his head like lamb's wool.
yes, it does say that in Daniel 7, but the New Testament never fulfills that. Yeah, I know, right, Charles? I mean,
Seated on his throne. And then the scene continues, right? Picking up at verse 13. And so this is why I have kind of an issue with
Represents every person that lived. Of every person, if I gave you a pen, I say make a circle where you can identify. I rephrase your question real quick.
try it. We talk validate the false claims of a false prophet. With God to use his power and say, I'm going to make this false prophecy come true under my own power.
I remember this. Well, we talked about that, right? Deuteronomy 13. It says that sign or wonder can come true. If a prophet or dream of dreams gives you a sign or wonder, and the sign or wonder which comes true. So obviously, Yahweh is using his power to do what? To test you. It says Yahweh your Elohim is testing you to find out if you love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul. And yeah, it is interesting how, there is this portion in here, and I don't remember the timestamp, where Professor Sahlberg tries to use the Talmud to defend Christianity. And Tobia's response is, it's I wish it was a little more humble. The Orthodox Jews do call the Talmud Torah. They do use it as authoritative writings or scripture. And Christians, and I saw Dr. Brown does this, and you see now Adam Fink is doing this appeal to the Talmud. Those of us walking with Yehovah alone, we don't care about the Talmud. But the Jews, in these debates, when the Christian goes to Talmud, they always deflect. And that's what I was looking for. Like, it's such a weird thing. Like, if you appeal to the Talmud privately, why should you not also appeal to it publicly? That doesn't surprise me, Bobby.
regarding the Jewish law,
Adam has revealed himself to be a hypocrite.
patience. I'm very familiar with this. I actually grew up Jewish, as you know. Later, of course, found the truth of Messiah. But in the Talmud, which is the Jews' main source of theology and thought, Messiah is actually mentioned several times in here. They mention him, not in a good light. They mention him burning in hell, and the reason for it, it says because he defied the sages, and which actually corroborates the story of the Gospels. It corroborates the story that because in the Gospels, a big part of Messiah's testimony, a big part of his teaching was to rebuke the man-made traditions, because what the Pharisees, the religious leaders at the time, had done.
Yeah, see Matthew 23, which I just was reading, where he violates his own higher instructions. Do not call a man a fool. And also Acts 23, where we see Paul doing the same thing, insulting the leaders of the people, the Pharisees and the high priests, and called out for it. Called out for violating Torah.
Is they had taken the laws that the Most High gave them and added all these extra laws on top of it.
Added these extra laws on top of it. You mean like blood communion, immersion in water, theophagy rituals of drinking grape juice and eating bread? Adding all these things on top of it, though. Okay.
And sometimes even just skirted around the laws of the Most High and kind of made their own. And so very often we saw Messiah rebuking them. And so it's interesting that in their rabbinical source, in their text, that's exactly what they say. They say he was defied the sages because of that he's burning in hell eternally.
And isn't it interesting, like, where did Christianity come from? I have to do this meme again because, and those of you who grew up in the 80s and 90s will remember this commercial, this anti-drug commercial. I have to get Toby in there too. Actually, I think I'm going to try to flip that. Let's take that one. Oh, jeez, Bobby. Sorry. That one cracks me up. The red heifer. Oh, lordy, lordy. Oh, there we go. Yeah, flipped. Yes, that's exactly the right way. Now it looks better. Perfect. Yeah, they have bred a red heifer. The That is such a weird thing because that's completely Talmudic as well. The red heifer only appears in Numbers 19. And let's read this together. Then Yahweh spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying, "This is the statute of the Torah which Yahweh commanded, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel that they take to you a red heifer without blemish, in which no defect in which the yoke has never been placed. You shall give it to Eleazar the priest, and it shall be brought outside the camp and slaughtered in its presence. Next, Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle it toward the tent of meeting 7 times. The heifer shall be burned in his sight, its hide and its flesh and its blood with its refuse shall be burned. And the priest shall take some of the cedar wood and the hyssop and the scarlet material and cast it into the midst of the burning heifer. And the priest shall then wash his clothes, bathe his body in water, and afterward come into the camp, but the priest shall be unclean until the evening. The one who burns it shall also wash his clothes in water and bathe it in his body in water, shall be unclean until evening. The man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer, deposit them outside the camp in a clean place, and the congregation of the sons of Israel shall keep it as a water to remove impurity. It is a purification from sin. The one who gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. And shall be a perpetual statute to the sons of Israel and the sojourner among them. Okay, so yeah, they believe he's the red heifer, but so do the Roman Catholics. This is the whole point with the Lent garbage, right? That they take the ash and spread it on their face. But we've already been over. Like, I mean, it's so insane. Like, you take a man, which is profane, and call him a red heifer, a lamb, or everything else. He fulfills every sacrifice and offering. Like, okay, but it's profane. It's evil. It's evil to kill an innocent man, and you know, calling him a lamb or a red heifer doesn't make it right. He's a man. He calls himself a man. Paul called him a man. I mean, look at Romans 8:3 again. And this is why I just hammer home, it's human sacrifice for what the law could not do. And look what Paul says here. The law could not do it. Do what? Kill a man for sin. He's telling you right there.
Anyways, there's other mentions of him as well. They said that he was a magician, a sorcerer, all sorts of things, which is exactly what they accused him of. They accused Messiah of being of Beelzebub, one of the devils, and that's the only way he was able to cast out these demons out of people was because he was, working before.
How are the Mormons able to cast out demons? How about Islam? You know, Islam casts out demons. Buddhists cast out demons. Roman Catholics cast out demons. How are they doing it? I guess you never ask that because it's only true if you're doing it, right?
So it's interesting that they've preserved that inadvertently in their text.
Right, which
He
is in
exists.
Scripture. It's in the New Testament.
If he never existed and the things that are written in the New Testament never happened, they would have never wrote about it.
Right.
They would have just said there's some legend about so and so that he never existed.
Right, but they don't. A lot of people out there who may have been on the line with Judaism or kind of a person disagreed with what he was saying, and so that leads us to our last historical figure that we have here, which there's quite a bit out there. There's many sources out there. Have like 5 sources. So much evidence for the Gospels. So much evidence for the New Testament. Another person would be the satirist Lucian, who came after Pliny the Younger, and he's a pagan author. And while ridiculing the Christians, yet he still acknowledged the existence of Yeshua, and that's once again another source.
Okay, this is I forget the fallacy here, but he acknowledges it, so therefore it's truth. Joseph Smith existed as a true prophet, and I just went over, they were persecuted. Just the fact that Joseph Smith existed means that what he said was true? Or how about the Pope? Roman Catholicism, and this is what is, Charles brought up in the chat, how in the beginning it says this, listen.
It's so good to have Professor Sahlberg with us tonight. Rod Sahlberg with us tonight. He is the author of 2 books and a leading Christian apologist against Torahism.
A leading Christian apologist against Torahism. This is the historical Jesus movement. Look at this epistle from Ignatius of Antioch, written in 110 AD. 110. Caution against false doctrines. Be not deceived with strange doctrines, nor with old fables, which are unprofitable. For we still live according to the Jewish law. And notice they call the Torah the Jewish law. We acknowledge that we have not received grace. For the divinest prophets lived according to Christ Jesus, which is absolute, utter garbage. Absolute, utter garbage. Take Isaiah 8:20, right? I mean, I don't know how they got away with this. They must have just relied on people's stupidity. And I say that in all honesty, because people did not know the truth. They did not know how to read. To the Torah and the testimony, if they do not speak according to this word, it is because they have no light in them. So he was living according to what? Not according to what he said. On this account, they also were persecuted. Some of them were persecuted, but the true prophets of Yah would stand through that persecution and survive, being inspired by his grace to fully convince the unbelieving that there is one God who has manifested himself by Jesus Christ, his son. See, this is like the red herring right here. Like, who is the son? It's Israel. Who is his eternal word, not proceeding forth from silence, and in all things pleased him that sent him. Let us live with him. If therefore those who were brought up in the ancient order of things have come to possession of a new hope, why would there be a new hope? I mean, all of a sudden, all the promises of Yah are gone, and we have a new hope. Okay, so everything's changed now in the first century. Surely the Lord Yahweh does nothing unless he reveals his secret counsel to his slaves, the prophets. That's a possibility. I think that's how I came back to it, Bobby. You know, I was reading the Torah because my ex at the time, she hated Jesus. So I thought, well, let's become religious Jews. So I read the Torah, wanting to know more. And then when I read that, it's brought this conviction into me of my sin. And I didn't know Torah, so I thought the only solution to that was the human sacrifice and offering of the New Testament. So that's why I turned to that. No longer observing the Sabbath. You see, this goes back to the first century. And this is why it doesn't make sense for you Messianics to follow Roman traditions. The Roman traditions tell you that the Sabbath is not to be observed, but living observance of the Lord's day, on which also our life is sprung up again by him, and by his death, whom some deny, by which mystery... See, this is the first century, and this is why their arguments are invalid as well. Why would some in the first century be denying this? Which mystery we have obtained faith, and therefore endure, that we may have found the disciples of Jesus, our only master. How shall we be able to live apart from him, who disciples the prophets themselves in the spirit did wait for him as their teacher? See, again, it's this appeal to the prophets, waiting for him. And I'm just going to make a meme about this too. Let's go here. No, I know which one I want. Let's see. There it is, road split. And this is what we see here. The Torah and the prophets all point us to Yehovah through the Torah. And they all, like Jeremiah, right? Jeremiah 6:16. And Yehovah said, stand by the ways and see and seek the ancient paths. It's not pointing you to something new. And this is the problem with the word new in Jeremiah 31:31. It's telling you, go back to the Torah. Jeremiah 9:13. And Yehovah said, because they have forsaken my Torah, which I set before them, and have not listened to my voice nor walked according to it. They were forsaking Torah. They had strayed from the ancient paths. Just like this meme shows. Torah says, stick to the straight and narrow. And I use that because this is what the New Testament uses, right? The true straight and narrow path is Torah. And nothing else. So let's read chapter 10 here. Let us not therefore be insensible to his kindness, for were he to reward us according to our works, we should cease to be. So this is a man that's appealing to the prophets and saying that. Jeremiah 17:10, I, Yehovah, search the heart, I test the inmost being, even to give according to each his ways, according to the fruit of his works, his deeds. Or Jonah 3:10, which is towards the Goyim, the Gentile. When Elohim saw their works, that they turned from their evil way, so Elohim relented concerning the evil which he had spoken, he would bring upon them, and he did not bring it upon them. But here you have this first century Christian saying that God will not judge you by your works. Therefore, having become his disciples, let us learn to live according to the principles of Christianity. For whosoever is called by any other name beside this is not of God. Lay aside, therefore, the evil, the old, the sour leaven, and be changed into the new leaven. And this is so fascinating, It's do. Yeah, and look at the meme, Charles. During the week of unleavened bread, he was risen, leavened man. Which is Jesus, which is what he says. Jesus is leaven during the feast of unleavened bread. But they be salted in him, lest anyone among you should be corrupted, since by your savor you shall be convicted. It is absurd to profess Christ and to Judaize. Well, someone should tell that to these guys. How can you profess Christ and keep the Sabbath? You're Judaizers.
Historical source that shows us that these people at least acknowledge that Yeshua was a real person. So I think we could do a little bit of deductive reasoning here, right? So we can see that all these people wrote about these figures, and now they're writing from a perspective of knowledge, right? Rome and its strength and its might and dignity and honor and power, right? They're like, well, these Christians, they don't know what they're doing, right? And then Jewish people just hate Yeshua, so they're like, the Jews wanted to make him look like a evil person, right? That the miracles he did are just.
Well, he kind of did that on his own. I mean, even, I keep going back to this, but John 6:56, he who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me. This is an evil statement. You should know. I mean, you guys claim to know Torah. Drinking blood is an abomination. It's an abomination. And yet, here you are saying, they tried to make him look evil. The New Testament does that plenty well on its own. Drink the blood of him, right?
Not true. But we can at least pull from these sources and say they all accepted that he was a real person. So that's, I think we could just think through that a little more, right? That shows something there. We also see that the Caesars that were mentioned in the Bible, all we have found coins with their faces inscribed on the coins, archaeological evidence. So this is archaeological finds.
These are real people.
Yeah, that they were real Caesars that were there during that. They were the proposed times in the documents in the Gospels matches up perfectly with when we find where the coins are coming from, what dates they were found in. So it's like these are archaeological too, but
Links so that you can search out all these things that were mentioned. Like I said at the beginning, we're kind of briefly covering a lot of these topics, and we'll leave you a trail of evidence that you can search out yourself.
Briefly in 3
So
hours.
another point I really just briefly wanted to make is that there's this claim that Yeshua is
Speaking of that, I'm already over an hour again.
image of all the other pagan gods, and so it quote unquote discredits Yeshua's teaching.
And they need to start work. Are those of you actually interested in me going through this whole video in a longer series? Some of this material is just golden. Hope all of you, the two of you actually watching this, have a great day. And those that watch later, you stay in the truth of Torah and don't go the path of Justin. There's no reason to go down that path. Hallelujah. Thank you for your revelation, Father.